Welcome back to the Happy Farm Life podcast. My name is Sierra Richard, and today we have a special episode, and we are going to give you the ultimate guide to navigating the personnel placement service at ASHP Midyear. The PPS process is always one that is a little bit daunting, so I brought in a guest to help me just uncover all of those mysteries for you today. So today I'm here with Dr. Micaela Hayes, and we are going to just tell all of the secrets that you want to know about PPS. So if you haven't interacted with Micaela before, I'm going to give her a chance to tell you a little bit about herself. So Micaela, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sierra. I'm so glad to be here and talk about the PPS and our personal placement services with ASHP. So my name is Micaela Hayes. I'm a clinical ambulatory care pharmacist. I completed 2 pharmacy residencies, both centered in ambulatory care, and I completed 2 PPS experiences. One was when I was going through my PGY2 application process, and then the second was at the 2022 ASHP Midyear event where I was looking for jobs, and we'll talk more about that later, but that's my experience with residency and PPS, and I'm so excited to dive deeper into PPS.
Well, I'm very excited to have you here because I also went through PPS. So I was on the back end doing some PGY1 interviews. I stepped in because my RPD lost her voice during midyear. And so the program director couldn't talk. So the residents were taking turns coming in and answering questions for her. And she was writing notes of things that she wanted us to mention. So it was a very interesting experience, one I didn't expect to have. But also during that midyear, those of you who know I didn't do a PGY2 may be surprised to find out that I actually did PPS for PGY2s and decided not to do one, but I did go through the entire process of interviewing with people before I made that decision. So before we dive too deep into our experiences with PPS, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people what that is. So what is PPS, or personnel placement service, based on your own experience?
Yeah, I think this is a great starting place for the podcast because when I was going through residency applications, like when I was a 4th-year pharmacy student and even as a resident, I was unsure what this PPS thing was. I would look and be like, oh, PPS, and kind of just thought it had to do with jobs. I wasn't quite sure. I didn't really look too deep into it. And then, so I ended up not doing PPS for my PGY1 applications. And when I really started to look into it, because I would talk to my friends in pharmacy school and they're like, yeah, that's for finding a job, not really residency. Well, then I looked into it for my PGY2 application season and I'm like, okay, you can actually interview with residencies before the actual application submission happens. So that's really beneficial for pharmacy residency candidates and the residency programs, because the residency programs get to see who you are and you get to put a good starting foot forward before you even submit your application and get to know the program more and get to get to know you more as an applicant. So when they see your application come through, they're like, oh yeah, Micaela, we loved her. Let's give her an interview. But it is kind of a daunting process because you're putting together a profile on this PPS service, so personal placement services. So you create a profile. It's kind of like your package. You have your CV on there, you have what you're interested in doing, and it's hosted through ASHP, and they usually have it with the clinical mid-year meeting. So what happens is, for my residency application process, I created a profile and then I would be checking to see what residency programs that I was interested in were available to interview with. And you basically reach out to the program and ask to schedule an interview. And what I didn't know was they're going to have different programs posting on the job board throughout a time frame. They're not all going to be ready to apply for it at one time. So I would just keep looking to see what programs are posting. And mine were all within North Carolina, so it was easy for me to search for what programs were available to interview with. And then basically you reach out and then they schedule an interview with you if they want to offer you an interview slot. And I had everyone that I reached out to interview with, I ended up having an interview with, and it went really well. It was very much like a residency interview. Some people, it was just like a get to know each other type of meeting, and some other residency programs would actually ask me questions. When I went through for my like job search period when I was a PGY2, I again was only searching in North Carolina, and I didn't reach out to anyone to interview. I created a profile. I put my CV and my experiences and my goals for my job as a clinical pharmacist on there, and then didn't reach out to anyone because no one was in North Carolina. But I had programs and jobs. It was jobs reach out to me to interview, and I thought, that's a great networking opportunity, and I accepted most of the interviews that I was offered, and I had some really cool opportunities present. So I interviewed for a renal transplant with a pediatric component pharmacist job, and I'm an AmCare girl.
I'm laughing because I know that you're an AmCare, not because I think it's funny that you would do that, but I just think it's funny because I'm like, I know this is not where Micaela like trained at all.
Oh yeah, so I'm an AmCare girl, all the way through, but I have a lot of cardiology experience throughout fourth year pharmacy school and residency, and I had heart transplant experience, but it was mostly centered in AmCare, a little bit of inpatient pieces, absolutely no pediatric experience on my resume, none. And so when they reached out, I was literally on the plane to Las Vegas with my residency program for midyear, and I'm looking online, and I'm like, wow, this place wants to interview me for renal transplant with peds. I was like, I have 0 renal transplant and 0 peds experience. Let's interview. So I set it up, and the first thing I asked, I was like, why me? And she said there was not a lot of people who had transplant experience. And transplant pharmacy clinical experience is pretty, I could be completely wrong, but for me, the drugs are a lot, you're seeing a lot of the same drugs.
Right. No, you're right. Similar. From my experience in peds transplant, I did a few peds transplants in my training since I am board certified in peds. So yeah, you're right. For our pediatric patients, at least I can speak to them. I can't speak to adults, but for the kids, it's you do different dosing and you might do a slightly different combination or a different titration, but it's a lot of the same medications that you're seeing over and over again. So right. Yeah, it is, I understand now, how it could be very transferable.
Yeah, but when you see, me as the AmCare pharmacist girl, and then, that job description does not match anything about what you would expect. And it was actually a great interview. When we finished, all my interviews that I had with PPS, went somewhere. They were interested. Mm-hmm. They wanted to continue talking. So it was an absolutely wonderful networking job opportunity for someone who's looking, nationally for a job. But I was so narrow scoped in my trying to stay in North Carolina, specifically the Charlotte area. It just wasn't it didn't work out for me to relocate to a different place in the country. But I had other opportunities with academia, which I'm very interested in, and I interviewed with Texas A&M School of Pharmacy. It was really cool. I absolutely would encourage anyone to do PPS, even if they're just interviewing residency programs or if they're looking at jobs.
So I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, but before we get too deep into this, that was a great description. To narrow that down, if you want the shortened version, essentially it's just mini interviews, pre-interviews for jobs. You're likely not going to get offered a job after that. And you're obviously, if you're going to do residency, you're going to have to come on for an on-site interview. It's not going to replace the interviews, but it's almost just an opportunity to do a shortened pre-interview to determine whether or not you're interested in moving forward with that position. Would you say that's kind of been your experience as well?
Yes, 1,000%. It's a pre-interview and getting your foot in the door for a job or a program.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the timeline for those of you who are now interested because you found out what it is and it's not just some random 3 letters that are on the ASHP Midyear website where everybody's talking about PPS and you're like, yeah, I don't need to do that. The timeline for this I want to bring up because when this interview goes live, this episode goes live, we're going to be close to some deadlines. So October 10th was when it came out for this year. And the interviews will occur during the fall, and at Midyear. There is a online component of this, so there are some online interviews and stuff that I think are happening right now as well, or like virtual interviews. But majority of the interviews are going to happen at Midyear. And so I have my notes here because I want to make sure I get the pricing right. So if you're going to register on or before October 22nd, you get a pretty steep discount. For students, it's going to be $95, but that will include however many interviews you do. So this is not like when you apply for residencies and like each program costs a little bit more after you hit like 4 or whatever. You can do as many interviews as you want, and that can change. You can add interviews while you're on site at PPS, which we can talk about later, like what the process is during Midyear. For residents, it'll be $130 for that early bird and $150 if you're just looking for a job and you're an applicant outside of residency. But that goes up pretty significantly once you get to October 23rd. So it's going to be $160 for students, $220 for residents, and $250 for an applicant. So if you're listening to this before October 22nd or on October 22nd, you might want to go ahead and register if you're considering it and you're going to Midyear, because it's going to give you a bit of a discount. So with that, let's talk about who should do PPS. So what do you think? If you are a PGY1, a PGY2, or doing a job, who do you think should go through the PPS process?
I think it can only help if you're interested in residency or if you're interested in jobs. It can only help you to do the PPS process, especially if you are already going to Midyear. As far as like if you had to make a decision and money was a big factor and you weren't going to Midyear and you asked me, hey, should I go to Midyear and should I pay this money just to do this PPS service? I would hesitate to really encourage you to do it if you're a residency applicant, but I would say it depends on if you're looking for jobs, because if you're looking nationally for jobs and you want the best opportunity to be a part of a really large networking opportunity for pharmacist jobs, I would say it could be something that's very beneficial for you to do. If you're already going to Midyear and the money is really not a big deal to you, I would highly encourage you to do it. So pharmacy student applying for residency, applying for jobs, or if you're a PGY1 or PGY2 resident, I would say do it.
I would say the only thing I would change with that is if you are doing the health systems administration and leadership residency programs and you're going there for residency interviews for PGY1, which would also be for PGY2, you really, really need to do PPS. Those are basically like pre-interviews, and you likely won't get an interview at places that are doing PPS if you don't participate in that. So I don't want you to get left behind. So that is the only thing that I would change. And they're very narrow. I would say you might run into that with possibly like the pharmacotherapy programs too, because they're 2 years for like the academia pharmacotherapy ones. I don't know that for sure, so don't quote me on that. But things that where you're going to be there for 2 years, I think you're more likely to need to do the PPS process at Midyear to have a better shot. But I would agree for residents, I feel like especially PGY1s, like the showcase is probably enough. I would say, though, the showcase is very overwhelming. So if you're somebody who can get overstimulated very easily, or maybe would be very nervous to ask questions in the chaotic environment that is the residency showcase, it might be beneficial for you to sit down one-on-one with them to get your answers, because it's going to be hard and very overwhelming if that's your situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I am a very outgoing, very gregarious human, and that whole Midyear residency booth situation was so overwhelming and overstimulating, and it's very chaotic, and you might not talk to the people that you want to talk to, and you might not be able to get a true vibe for the right people that you would be working with in that residency environment. And if you did the PPS interview, you would be talking to the RPD for sure, and maybe other people in that program. So you could potentially get a better understanding of the type of environment that you would be in, rather than just going into the booth, because the booth can be so overwhelming. You might not talk to the RPD, for example, and get a sense of who that person is before applying.
Yeah, and for Showcase, I have a whole lot of tips for Showcase, which is to be an entire separate episode. Probably will be, honestly. But is a very overwhelming thing to be in the showcase. And so if you want a little bit more of the intimate environment where you can for sure get your questions answered and all of your questions answered, PPS is probably worth it. I would say less PGY1 programs offer PPS versus PGY2s. A lot of PGY2s do. And I did PPS for PGY2, as did you. And I thought it was extremely beneficial because when you're going through PGY2s, you're already in a PGY1. And so you can't interview at the same number of places that you did for PGY1 if you did a lot of interviews or applied at a lot of places. You really have to narrow your list, and I think doing PPS for PGY2s allows you to narrow that list appropriately because you've had the adequate amount of time to talk to the programs.
Yeah, another thing that I thought about when you were talking about that is like I PPS'd with a program. It was a top on my list, and they ended up early committing an internal candidate and not even going into the residency match process or application process. So it might even be helpful for you as a candidate to PPS to show that you're interested, show that you're a good candidate. I mean, ultimately, I guess it didn't work out for me. And it might have been better for them to internally hire this guy who was already going through their program. And I know him and love him. Like, it was great. But I think it might be beneficial for you to show that program, hey, I'm interested, I'm a great candidate, in case they're on the fence about their internal candidates. Then they might actually enter the match because they see that, you know, there's some good possibilities out there for them.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice if you have a program that's maybe on the fence on whether or not they're going to early commit or not. If you are coming in and you're showing you're a really great candidate and maybe they have 2 or 3 of those that PPS'd with them, they are more inclined to just say, we're actually going to open up interviews rather than just hire the internal candidate. Not to say that that always will change their mind because it depends on how the program is structured, but I feel like you're right. It gives that opportunity for that to happen.
Right.
Where you might not have that otherwise. So let's transition a little bit into the process for PPS. So you had talked a little bit about what happens before. So say you decide today that you're going to register for PPS, you're going to pay that fee and open your account. What are the next steps for a candidate who is interested in like registering with PPS and then scheduling interviews?
So the next steps after you sign up and have an account is just laying out your profile in a way that shows, you know, one, an up-to-date, very professional CV that you would submit to residency applications. You want, you know, to put your best foot forward because this is the first time they're seeing you as a potential candidate. And every interaction with any residency program, if you're interested in residency or a job, you want to put your best foot forward always. So I think the next step is figuring out what programs you're interested in or what jobs you're interested in and narrowing down maybe your location of where you're applying to or how you're going to look for jobs or what types of jobs you're looking for. So, and then aligning your profile to match that you're a good candidate for those type of jobs that you're looking for or those types of residencies that you're looking for. And that's honestly how these programs are going to find you, is through your profile that you create. And I'm pretty sure PPS will give you guidance on creating that profile and being the strongest candidate, and they show you like how much traction you're getting to your profile. And honestly, that's how that program or that job offer came to me for the renal pediatric transplant position, because they saw that I think I wrote a bio blurb and I talked about like my experiences, and transplant was on there. So I think that like triggered me to show up on their profile and then them to reach out to me for a job interview. So that profile, creating a good professional profile that shows your short-term and long-term goals, your interest in clinical pharmacy positions, and your interest in residency or whatever jobs you're looking for, and then start narrowing down your search for how you're going to look for positions and connecting with programs. And like I said, not everything's going to be posted at the very beginning. Things can be posted incrementally, like throughout. So just keep checking that job board and figuring out what you can reach out to interview with.
Yeah, I want to bring up the point where you said that like your blurb had transplant in it. A lot of people don't realize that you can do a lot of keyword searching And so it's just like Google. Like if you put the word transplant in, you're going to get a bunch of stuff back on transplant. Well, these programs are doing the same thing with these PPS profiles where they can search for candidates who meet these key words and these trigger words. So if you are interested in, say, transplant, you want to make sure transplant comes up frequently in your profile so people can find you and that's what you're interested in. I mentioned like the health systems administration and leadership roles. Like you want to put that in your little like it's like a I don't know what they call it if it's a bio or like it's kind of just like your little like interest statement. Like here is what I am interested in, why I'm doing PPS. So if you're interested in those programs, you want to type out the name of those types of programs. I am looking for a health systems administration and leadership pharmacy residency. You know, be very specific. Tell them what you want. I was actually PPSing for med safety positions, so I put that I am interested in medication safety PGY2 residency programs. So keeping it to where they can search on the system and your profile will come up is going to be very beneficial for you when you're setting up that program, like profile.
Definitely. That's great advice.
So when you're talking about the profile and then you mentioned like reaching out to programs, so can you go into a little bit of the process of what you should do when you're asking to interview with a program?
Yes, and I've been thinking about this to kind of recreate verbally what I did when I was reaching out to programs for PPS. I can't remember exactly the process of how you had to do it, but basically in summary of what you do, you reach out and you just like send an email basically, but it's through the PPS system, and you just say like request an interview. And I kind of I think I can't remember I'm trying to remember, but I think I wrote it like a letter of intent because I already had letters of intent from my PGY1 application season. So I just made a letter of intent, and that's how I reached out to that program, and it laid out, why I was interested in that opportunity. For me, it was residencies because that's who I actually reached out to interview with. So like, hi, my name is Micaela. I'm really interested in your program because of XYZ. And then I would talk about my experiences like clinically, leadership, research, community service, like talk about those different things and how basically what I had, how it aligned with their program, and then finished up with like, I'd love to interview with you. And they had my CV on my profile. And then they basically would reach out in a pretty reasonable time frame, like a day or two, and then they would say, I think they would just schedule you. Can you remember? I would just get like a scheduled interview.
Yeah, they would send like a schedule invitation for when they were free. And then I think it typically would show where you're free because you can actually set your availability. So for example, if you were a PGY1 who's interviewing for PGY2s and you're going to be at a showcase at a specific time, or you're presenting your poster, you can block out those times so they can't schedule you for those times. And if you've already scheduled a PPS interview that's on the books, that will be like a blocked out time so they can't schedule with you. So that is where the scheduling comes in. So they typically would just put something basically on your calendar and you would get an email notification saying like, hey, this person has scheduled you for an interview. And then you can, choose to decline that or request a different time if something did come up and that was a block that you're no longer going to be available. It's not a big deal to reschedule these interviews either. This happened all the time. Like I had a couple of mine, they originally scheduled me and they're like, hey, the RPD got requested to do something else during that time and they won't be available. Do you want to still do this time or can we reschedule it to another time? And we just would move it. It was not a big deal at all. The other thing I want to mention is once you get to midyear, if you connect with somebody and they mention that they have PPS and you decide that you want to like interview with them, like it is not uncommon to schedule an interview the day before or like the day of. I actually talked to somebody in the morning and they're like, actually, we'd really like you for PPS. We have some openings this afternoon. Like if you want to just like send us a request of when you're available on our schedule, we have our schedules like up to date. And so I did that and I scheduled one the same day. So once you get to midyear, it's kind of a free-for-all. You may change your mind. I actually matched at a program that was not on my list before midyear for PGY1 that I met somebody from that program and decided to like talk to them at the showcase and then ended up applying and then ended up matching there. So you don't know what's going to happen once you get to mid-year is what I'm saying here. That's the point, is like things could change. Do not be nervous to reschedule. Do not be nervous to add somebody at the last minute.
Yeah, you touched on some points that like triggered some memories. So for PGY1 applications, I was super open because I was like, I'm sorry, when I was interviewing with residency, so the PGY2 application process, PPSing, I was very like open and let the residency pick, you know, whenever they wanted to schedule me, I would do it. And it was all virtual, so that made it a lot easier. And I only interviewed with North Carolina programs, but a program in like different programs would reach out to you. And I ended up talking with like a program in Indiana and a program in Tennessee, just because like, why not? Like, why not, you know, talk to someone if they want to interview with you and you have the availability to do it. And I ended up actually submitting an application to the program in Tennessee. And I interviewed with them for PGY2 it was an AmCare residency, and I loved them. The only thing that really inhibited me from going there was that they were in Tennessee, and I had a loan program set up that pays back my student loans if I work in North Carolina, which was a major factor of why I stayed in North Carolina. And I also like to be close to family.
That's a good reason to say. Student loans.
I'm super grateful now. Yeah. So then, then when I went through job application things, I was in person at Midyear in Las Vegas with my residency program, Duke, and I was less strict. I was less open, basically. I'm like, okay, well, there's not really people that I'm really interested in for a job in North Carolina with, so I'm just gonna like allow these 2 days that I know like this is gonna be my PPSing days. And it worked out really well. And then programs will also meet with you outside of PPS. If like your schedule doesn't align and their schedule doesn't align, they're like, hey, let's talk for 30 minutes outside of this. So, you know, everything is really like flexible, and like Sierra said, you don't have to stick to the schedule or have a lot of time before you have your interview with the program. It can be very like haphazard sometimes, or flexible.
It's a lot more casual than what you think of for like a normal residency interview, where you have like the interview on the books like a month in advance and you have very strict times that you're switching between things. The biggest thing I would say when you're going to mid-year is just, if you're in the PPS suite, like it's fine to have back-to-back interviews. It's not that big of a deal. It's very small. You might want like a short time block in between, like 15 minutes or so, just so you have a time to like breathe between interviews. But when it comes to traveling from events, just keep in mind that these convention centers are huge. So if you've not been to Midyear before, it is a very large area and space that you're going to be in. So if you are going to be like doing a poster presentation, you probably won't know how close that is to the PPS hall until you get there. So if you're scheduling ahead of time, give yourself plenty of time going from one location to another, because you actually might not even be in the same building depending on where you are and like what you're doing. So just keep that in mind. Like 30 minutes between something is probably a smart move, just to make sure you have time to travel between the different areas. Has that been your experience with the in-person ones?
Yeah, definitely. And even the convention center, like we were at Midyear, so we were in this huge room, and then they'd have like these booths set up with like cloth, like making it a room, and you went behind the cloth and sat with them in this room. But even walking like all the way, if you had to go all the way across, you'd want like at least 5 minutes. And you can map it out beforehand, but I would just like be aware that you don't want them to be back to back, because you don't want to miss an appointment or waste someone's time, because that's definitely not putting your best foot forward.
Yeah, and if you do end up, like if they're only available at one time, because I had one where I ended up doing back to back because the times that the programs were available and I was available were back to back. I just let them know ahead of time. I said, I do have another interview scheduled immediately before this. Is that okay with you? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's totally fine. So they were aware that I might not be there right on time. It's just good communication of those things, if that does happen to you, is key, because the whole point of this is to put your best foot forward. You've said that a couple of times, so you want to do that. The other thing is, you had mentioned people reaching out to you. So you have the opportunity to keep your profile private until it's like fully done, and then you can turn it on to public. Once you turn it on to public, that is when people can start searching for you. That's when they can reach out. And you mentioned there were people that reach out to you that you went ahead and interviewed with, but maybe somebody doesn't want to do that because they know they're absolutely like not going to go to Tennessee, or they're not going to go to whatever program, or they're just not interested. Make sure you reply to all of those would be another tip that I have. Like, be really respectful and say, thank you so much for the opportunity and reaching out to me. At this time, I'm not interested in that position. But I do appreciate you connecting with me. And if you have other opportunities that fits XYZ, whatever you are interested in, please let me know, or something along those lines. Just keep it respectful. Do you have any other advice when it comes to like them reaching out to you when you're getting like invites to schedule interviews?
Yeah, I mean, think about if you were in their position reaching out, like you want to be respectful and, like you said, respond and say, I would say why. Like, if I'm applying to North Carolina programs and they're in Indiana and I don't want to meet with them, I would say, thank you so much, but this is why I'm just looking in North Carolina because of, my personal circumstances or whatever. But that's really all you covered everything with that section. But I definitely agree with like responding and being, because you never know, they could move and be in North Carolina and then be interviewing you for your dream job. You don't ever want to like burn a bridge in any way by not being respectful.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So I think we've hit on a few different points on how to prepare for these interviews, but what would be your best recommendations for preparing for your PPS interviews?
That's a great question. So, how I prepared for these interviews and how I would encourage you to prepare, and you might have other tips for this as well. When I prepare for an interview with these PPS ones specifically, let's start with the residency program. I would read everything that they had listed on the PPS job board site starting there. And I would I'd have two screens up, and like one with the information, and my other laptop would be like a document, and I'd have questions written at the top. And as I'm reading through the material about their program on the PPS board, I would write down any questions that I wanted to ask them, or just random questions that I had, and that maybe I would find as I continued going forward researching the program. Then I would move to anywhere there was information listed about that program, whether it was their website, social media, or the ASHP directory, pharmacy residency directory. I would like find out who was involved in this program, like the current residents, the RPD, and I would write their names down so I would know like who is this program, like who represents this program. And then I would from those questions that I wrote down, I would like, if they were answered, I would just jot down notes. Like I'd have notes that I like, things that I really liked about it, maybe cons that I didn't like about it as I was researching the program. And then I would those questions that I have, those will be my basis to like have questions prepared for our time together. So you want to show interest, and they're going to ask you like, what questions do you have? And sometimes the PPS interviews weren't interviews like, tell me a time when blah, 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 blah. They were like just getting to know each other. What's your goals with residency, Micaela? Oh, well, I want to be an AIM care pharmacist and I want to work in primary care. I like cardiology. And then I would say, I heard it, like I read this about your program. I'd love to learn more about it, or I'd love to hear more about it, or anything that you came across, and just have 2 or 3, maybe 5 questions prepared, and start with the ones that you're most concerned about, and then have extras if you want to potentially fill space or something like that. And then the last thing I would do to prepare, and I literally did this on the flight to Midyear. So like I would like try to I'd look up the people who I was interviewing with to see if I could find any like common interests or common people that we had that we had in our network, or maybe they were involved in research or a publication or something that I had connections with, or I could just bring it up that, oh, I saw that you were involved in this research project that you published in this blah, blah, blah. And I would talk about that. It would just be a way to show, again, your interest. It'd be a great conversation piece if there became dead space, or if you just wanted to like show them that you were interested and that you looked up their program. And then last, I would look on I would look everyone up on like LinkedIn to see if we had common connections like in our network, to just say like, oh, I saw that you know Dr. So-and-so, and then talk about that, because that can be helpful. Networking is so key. And that's how I did the same thing with jobs. Like I'm always looking to see, like research know everything about the program, take notes for myself to see what I like, what I don't like, have questions, and then like see where connections are and like common pieces.
I agree with everything that you just said, but the only thing I would add that I did differently is I made sure I had like 2 or 3 similar, like the same question that I would repeat over and over again for the interviews. So each place that I interviewed, I would have kind of like a comparator question. Like I would ask them what they think is the strengths of their program. So all of them would ask that. I would say, what things are you trying to improve upon your program? I think I asked it more so as like, how have you taken resident feedback in the past to improve your program moving forward? And then usually if there was like the resident in there, I would ask them what their favorite thing is about the program. So trying to keep some consistent questions that I could like get answers for, that I could compare the different programs and how they answered it. So the last thing I want to talk about moving to the next phase of the PPS process is, what should you do after you interview with a program at PPS?
Yes, I always reached out to the program to send them a thank you email follow-up. I guess you could do a real written note, which would be ideal, but I don't know if it would get to them, and just like the logistics of that aren't that great, so I always went with an email. And I think within PPS, I would follow up in the PPS system, because that's how you're communicating with the programs or the jobs. So I just would do a thank you email, and it would be short, sweet, to the point. I would just be like, subject was thank you. And then I would write, it was such a pleasure meeting with you on whatever day. And I would say something personal to what we talked about, or what I liked about the program, or what I liked learning from them. And especially if I was really interested in them, I would make it very personal to the conversation that we had, so it doesn't look like a generic thanks for meeting with me, bye. Just because I think that adds a really professional touch, and it shows you're very interested in their program and helps them categorize you in their mind as like, the interview went great and she's really interested. That's how I would follow up. Same thing with residency interviews. In the real thing, I would do the same thing.
I would agree with that. I did do handwritten notes on top of the emails for actual interviews, like actual residency in-person interviews. I did not do that for PPS. I did the same thing, did an email, and then I just made sure for them, I had decided afterwards, like a little bit later, that I was not going to interview. And so I had a couple of them reach out to say that they were wondering if my application was going to come through, because med safety PGY2s, there's not that many people who go into them. So I think there was just like a smaller candidate pool. Maybe that's why they were reaching out. But 3 of the programs that I PPS with reached out after the interview and after the thank you to ask if I was going to apply. And I ended up not doing that. So I told them just, my personal situation has changed and I was no longer going to go for the med safety positions, but that I really appreciated their time and that I hope they found a great candidate. Because that's true. Like, all of the programs I interviewed with were awesome. And I do hope that they get the best candidate. So that's kind of how I approach things after the event. But I agree. I sent out the information through the PPS portal first, and then those other emails came through like later after midyear, where they were asking me if I was going to be applying. And so those were emails directly, but the majority of the initial communication I was doing in that same platform. All right, so with all of that in mind, we've given you a lot of information about PPS. So the big takeaways I want you guys to get from this is if you are going to mid-year, you probably should go ahead and sign up for PPS. If you can get that early bird rate, go ahead and do it. It's probably going to be worth it. If you are doing a health systems administration, pharmacy, and leadership residency, then you're definitely going to want to do PPS. PGY2s and job interviews are also great reasons to do PPS. So all of those reasons are out there for you. If you are meeting one of those qualifications, PPS is probably for you, and you want to make sure that you are setting up your profile, getting engaged early on, and then it's okay if you have to move stuff around later on during mid-year. And then afterwards, just make sure you follow up, stay respectful, and tell them thank you for their time, because they're putting a lot of time and effort into working with you and interviewing you. So before we wrap up, I always like to ask this question of the guest on the podcast. So what do you like to do to relax or have fun outside of pharmacy?
Yes, this is a great question, especially being a new practitioner and outside of residency, not in residency anymore, basically. I love to spend time, one, with my family and friends, and I love to spend time outside. So with my family, we ride horses a lot, and I just like to, help with animals. My mom has 2 dogs that we love to spend time, going on walks with the dogs or riding horses. And then I have been really trying to implement like holistic health practices into my life as a new practitioner, because I really had to put that on the back burner in residency and as a pharmacy student, and like even as an undergrad, because I played a college sport, I really never had the time to do exactly what I wanted to do. And when I got through playing college sports, I was like, I never want to have to be forced to work out ever again. I'm never running ever again, because I was like, yelled at and forced to do whatever the program had us doing. So I have reframed this mindset, and I have started my own company, which I'll talk about at the end, but I really try to take my lunch period to like eat lunch for 30 minutes and then 30 minutes get outside and do whatever. So I either go for a walk for 30 minutes and talk to my mom on the phone, or my fiance's been deployed, so I've been talking to him on the phone during my lunch break. Or I've had a fitness goal of trying to run for 30 minutes or 20 minutes, let's be real, 20 minutes 3 times a week. So I've started running, and I've been doing it for like 10 weeks now. And then happenstance, I got a call from my high school softball team, and they're going to do an alumni softball game, where alumni softball players from my high school who have graduated are going to come back and play in a like benefit game where we're going to raise money for the team. So I was like, well, that was perfect timing that I started implementing these running practices so that I don't pull something when we do that. So those are the main things I've been doing to try to have fun and enjoy life outside of pharmacy.
I love that. I am not a runner, but I did just purchase a walking pad that I'm using like while I'm editing and stuff. It has been a game changer, and I love going on hikes outside. And eating my lunch outside has been the big thing, because we have a 30-minute lunch break, but there's like patios throughout like our hospital that you can go sit at. And so I've been trying to find all of them. They're hidden everywhere because we're like next to a med school. So I've like found one in the med school that I really like, that you can like really hide from people, and you're just like by yourself in this little corner. It's great. So you kind of sprinkled in that you had a business. Like, let's talk about that. What is your business and what's going on with that?
Yes. So I started a business. I have a very non-traditional pharmacist position. I did 2 ambulatory care residencies, and as I was looking for jobs as I was coming to the end of my PGY2 residency, I saw where there are some pharmacists who create their own position, and I was like very interested in that. So I created a business called Tailored Pharmacist Services, and it's a play off my middle name, which is Taylor. So we basically work to start clinical pharmacist services in independent doctor's offices. So that could be, right now we're in primary care offices, but we could work in cardiology or different specialty clinics. And we're starting a clinic next week, which is exciting. And then I also, so under Tailored Pharmacist Services is at the Faithful PharmD, which is on Instagram and YouTube. And that is basically just targeting and offering free and paid services to pharmacy residency candidates who are looking to get coaching or mentoring through the pharmacy residency application process. When I was a fourth year pharmacy student going through this, I felt terrified and alone and just really looked to Instagram influencers, if you will, that were pharmacists giving you guidance on how to navigate this process and what their life was as a resident. And I just thought, I really want to turn around and do the same thing, for others, because I gained all this knowledge and expertise by listening to audiobooks, reading books, listening to podcasts, getting guidance from mentors. And I just wanted to provide that in any capacity that anybody wanted to pursue it, whether it was through like navigating the whole process, help with your CV, help with your letters of intent, help with interviewing, or if you just wanted to consume the free content that I'm posting on Instagram or YouTube, that, whatever's best for you, I'll tailor it to how I can help you. You can find me, like I said, at the Faithful PharmD on Instagram and YouTube. And then we have a website, which is www.tailoredpharmacistservices.com, or you could go to happypharmlife.com/faithfulpharmd and find me there. Reach out in any way, in any capacity. I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Micaela. She has some really good content on pharmacy, like residency programs and how to go through the application process. So if you followed me because of that, you also want to go follow her because she's doing some of the same things and also brings a different perspective because I didn't do the PGY2 process. I'm not in ambulatory care. I went hospital. So she can give you a lot of different perspectives that maybe I can't because I didn't go through the same experiences. So if you want to get like the full gamut of experiences, having both of us on your list of followers is definitely where you want to be. So with that, you want to go ahead and check out Micaela, like she said, at happypharmlife.com/faithfulpharmd. I will have linked all of the really awesome resources that she has for residency candidates. If you also want to learn some of the secrets from the residency application process, I'm going to be doing a webinar on November 5th. So you can go to happypharmlife.com/secrets to get registered for that. It's a free event. I'm just going to be sharing some things that I feel like were secrets. Nobody told me whenever I was going through the process. So that's another extra way to get all of the good free resources to get you ready for your residency application process. So make sure you check that out. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching or listening. And until next time, keep on living your happy farm life. Bye.